You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
All right, let's get back to some boring subjects.
Understand the risk to our country.
Freedom brings people together.
You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. It's great to be back with you after a really long hiatus for me. Glad to be here. Got my voice back. Took a full month. But today, we are going to be talking about the Supreme Court and their ruling in the vaccine and test mandate. And we'll read through the opinions, give you both sides, and then help you make up your mind. So stay tuned right after this.
Hey, Fidelity. How can I remember to invest every month?
With the Fidelity app, you can choose a schedule and set up recurring investments in stocks and ETFs.
Oh, that sounds easier than I thought.
You got this.
Yeah, I do. Now, where did I put my keys?
You will find them where you left them.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
Warning. This show is for adults by semi-adults, so the language is sometimes strong and offensive.
I don't know what I said.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Our goal is to help you sound smarter while talking to your friends. If you struggle to understand politics, we explain it from an independent, libertarian point of view. With all of the irreverence it deserves, we toss out the screaming heads, put people before political parties, and give context to the news to make you think. Now, here's our host, Chris Spangle, a 15-year veteran of politics and media.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Thank you for being here today. It is great to be back with you, starting a brand new year here on the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network and the Chris Spangle Show. And joining me are my regular co-hosts here most Saturdays and sometimes hosts. First, we start with Harry Price. Harry, how are you?
Going good. I'm going good.
And Rhinehold, how about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm my first day on some new medication, so we'll get to see how that plays out live on the show.
Well, hopefully it gets weird. So, yes, I have been gone for over a month. I lost my voice on December 1st on the trip down to my wedding on December 4th, and I did not get it back until December 25th. And then in the middle of, even after the honeymoon, we had a great honeymoon in the Dominican Republic, and I firmly believe it would have taken longer had I not been in a tropical paradise for 8 days. So it is great to be back, and I thank you. If any of you are still subscribed to this feed, thank you for listening. We are back to work, and I am feeling better. My COVID brain is largely gone after months. I got it in early September, Delta, and it took a long time before, and it's hard to kind of remember some things and not as sharp as I used to be. So maybe that's age, who knows? Corey asks, do you remember how to podcast? Barely. I've been doing the pat down, but I have not been here. But I've got 2 episodes ready for the feed, ready and recorded, and we're thinking about the future. The 10th anniversary of We Are Libertarians is coming up on March 8th. And we've got Brian Nichols has announced that he's leaving Philadelphia and moving to Indiana. I don't know if he's announced which city yet. I haven't heard his podcast on that decision, but we're excited to have him here, and we're going to work on making wall fun again. So we're putting together, Harry and I have talked about our strategic vision. If you'd like to rent out Harry's beanie, then please, by all means, send in a sponsorship. And yeah, we're looking forward to the new year and getting back to work. We could not do this without our patrons, and I did forget to pull this out and thank our patrons. So
always willing to pull it out, huh?
Well, I'm married now, so I can.
Excuse me while I whip this.
First, we want to thank our patrons. Thank you to everybody that supports us. It is incredibly important, especially as we start thinking about what we're going to do. I am, to be frank with you, close to doing this full-time. I'd love to do this full-time, and that requires you. So if you support this show, if you get something out of the show, if you get value of listening to the show, then please join the Patreon at joinwalplus.com. That's WAL+.com. Thank you especially to our $100 a month members, John Pusilo, Casey Feldposh, Lars Nordskog, Jake Edel, Matthew Durbin, Rhinehold, Christy Avery, and Jason Doolittle. Thank you all for supporting us at a high level that allows us to continue running this great podcast network. So let's start talking about the Supreme Court. We have quite the decision that was handed down by the Supreme Court, and everyone's reaction to it seems to be falling along partisan lines. The Republicans, well, actually, they're mixed. Don Jr. is very mad still and hates Justice Kavanaugh, even though most suspect him having written the OSHA declaration. But he sided against the healthcare workers, and now they have a vaccine mandate. So essentially, what happened? The National Federation of Independent Businesses, which was a group that was formed during the to essentially fight the mandate for insurance under Obamacare, and they got the band back together to take this to the Supreme Court. There were dozens of people that sued to fight this mandate, and essentially what the mandate said is that any company over 100 employees had to mandate their workers get the vaccine, or they have to test. Now, this was something that hit my life recently. My wife is a teacher at a school, and the school came down with a mandate outline, basically following the guidelines that OSHA had outlined. And what this essentially looked like for this school was mandatory vaccination for all employees, and you had to have your third booster shot. That is part of being fully vaccinated according to OSHA's rules, which caused a lot of problems for a lot of the staff. You could also get tested every week, and you had to wear a mask if you did not want to get the vaccine. Now, it's obviously very hard to teach in a mask. It's impossible to get a test. I think at that time when it was being discussed, and in Indiana, there were like 11,000 tests left, and the governor had just restricted access to tests. So it was sort of like, okay, you want me to get tested? I'm going to have to take an extra day out of my week to try and track one down, find one, get tested, come in, wear a mask. I'm going to be wearing a cloth mask, which the CDC announced yesterday. I don't get why this is some sort of shocking news to people, but the CDC came out and said that cloth masks don't work. Well, that's basically what everybody said in the beginning when, these nice people are making cloth masks for everybody, and then the know-it-all on your Facebook feed would go, those don't work, only N95s work. So that's something that we've all kind of known from the beginning. But, it was a huge hurdle. And, we've talked about how could OSHA enforce it? And what they were told is that the local health department would be enforcing it. Now, I have no idea if this is in the standard because I don't know how OSHA, a federal agency, could force a local county health department to fine and enforce this and be basically their policing power. But, it's not like the public health department wouldn't take on that role and relish the opportunity to go in and fine someone $10,000. As a revenue mandate, a revenue collection tool. The mandate essentially said that it was $13,000 roughly for a fine, and if it was an accident, and $136,000 fine if it was a willful disobeying of the OSHA mandate. Now, and this school basically said, and this is a Christian private school, by the way. This is not a local school. The local school districts have not implemented this. And they said if you're wearing a mask improperly and it's hanging off your nose, that's a fine. We could get fined, so you will be asked to leave if your mask is not fitted properly. Now, what was the fallout of that? 92 employees connected to this church's school. They were over 100 because of the other church employees. 25, I think, was the number, had complied by the date, and over 50 of them had serious concerns with it, and most of the staff was vaccinated. It wasn't a largely unvaccinated staff. It was that many of them were just getting over Omicron. For instance, one teacher was like, I just had Omicron. My doctor doesn't want me to get a booster. Am I going to, be penalized for having a recent natural immunity, a recent infection? And they said, yes, you have to get the booster, or you have to go through the testing protocol. That was the sticky wicket for a lot of the staff, was the booster. It was the forcing them to get immunity for something that they just had. So you're starting to see a lot of people, I don't know about you guys in your life, but I'm starting to see a lot of people who kind of did everything that they were told to do going, hey man, what the hell, with a lot of the rules and regulations. Now the conversation is you have to only wear an N95 mask. Well, we're 3 years into this. Why didn't you guys say that at the beginning? So the CDC's flip-flopping on so many different things is also starting to awaken people to the idea that the CDC, the FDA, and these government agencies and OSHA, these are government agencies. They are political organizations. They are not science. They help articulate science, but a lot of times they're political organizations that flip-flop back and forth because of what Twitter says. Now, we are not going to talk about whether or not you should get the vaccine on this episode. We are not talking about the science of COVID. We are not talking about the pandemic at large. We are going to be discussing the legal conversation and the government's role in the pandemic. I want to make that clear because it seems very, I don't know what it is, guys, but no matter how careful I had a conversation with someone that I've known for a long time, and they were just hysterically mad at me for consistently saying, hey, if you let the government do something, it never goes away. For instance, if you are in Philadelphia and you have to show a vaccine card to go to dinner, they're going to include every booster. They're going to start including flu shots. They're going to start including all these different things. That will never be rolled back. You're still taking your shoes off at the airport. So you need to think about, as a resident of that location, what you are willing to do for the rest of your life and for your kids' lives. Because when the government takes a power, they do not give it back. Well, this person just called me an anti-vax nut job, and I'm against every mitigation effort, and you must... And I saw it in the news, the Supreme Court goes anti-vax. That was a headline in the New Yorker, New York magazine. Well, they're all boosted. Every single one of them has taken the booster shot. The big discussion was Neil Gorsuch not wearing his mask. Every single lawyer, journalist, Supreme Court justice, clerk that sits in that room when they have oral arguments has been tested before they go in. They've all been boosted. There's a vaccine mandate there. So it's just sort of like, we're really going to spend all of our time arguing about whether Neil Gorsuch wore a mask or not, when the people who are most vulnerable were on Zoom that day. So there's just... I don't know. The arguments around COVID have just become so tedious. Rhinehold, I know that you and I go back and forth a lot. You are not again, people misread things that are said publicly. People think Rhinehold is some sort of screeching leftist. He basically has a pink ponytail behind there. He's he's super woke. But you went to dinner recently for the first time in several years. May I say you didn't wear a mask? I mean, you're not cowering in fear. You're just like most of us saying, all right, we need to take COVID seriously, but let's just reevaluate every couple weeks where we're at and adjust, and don't put things into law because it's just going to divide us. Is that a fair summation of what you believe?
Yeah, I don't believe in government mandating this stuff. So just to clarify a few things, the reason I haven't been to a restaurant, I've been to restaurants, I just haven't gone out to eat with my wife, and it wasn't because of COVID, it was because she was in an accident and had cancer. and all this other things that had happened. So it was kind of like our first time going out to sit down and have a meal in a long time because of that, not because we were COVID worried or whatever like that. So no, I don't wear masks because I'm vaccinated. So that's the law, right? You don't have to wear a mask.
This is the thing. When we last did the show, the vaccine, I mean, we were told in July, if you get the vaccine, it's going to stop the spread of the virus. Now, that's clearly not true with Omicron. It's not going to end the pandemic. It's a lot of what we heard in the beginning of, like, you can't vaccinate away a coronavirus. It's like the flu vaccine. You have to update it. There will always kind of be boosters available, I guess, and the tech will be updated. But if you get the vaccine, it's pretty clear that your personal health is protected a lot better. So when this mandate was written, it was posed as if we force 2/3 of the American workforce, roughly 80 million people, to get this, then it's going to, they argue that it was going to save 6,500 lives and prevent 230,000 hospitalizations. I don't know how you argue for or against that. I don't know how you make that number up. But it seems fairly obvious to me that the vaccine is, like, everybody acts like it's still April 2020. Like, in April 2020, we didn't know a lot about this. We didn't have really any treatments. We didn't know what worked or what didn't. 3 years on, we know ways to mitigate it. There's personal treatments to help reduce the impact of it in both the vaccine, the monoclonal antibodies, and other things. And so I don't know why people in my life are more afraid now than they were back then. I mean, please explain it, Rhinehold.
Well, I mean, I don't know how to explain that it's more people think it's more dangerous. I don't think that that's the case. I think what people are just concerned about is that there's a lot of people who think that if we had just done the right things, we had got good testing early on and were able to self-isolate and do the things we needed to do individually, we could have mitigated a lot of this stuff that's happening right now.
Yeah,
the spread would have been a lot less, everything else. So when they see people now still saying that they're not going to get vaccinated and they're not going to do the precautions, and it's just like, why don't you just do it? People are understandably against the onerous things that have been done, like shutting down businesses and things like that, but I don't think they're against doing personal preventative stuff that's not that big of a deal. I mean, wear a mask when you go out. It's not killing anybody. It's not killing you to do it, and it kind of might help a little bit. So, that's a small minor thing. And when people are upset about that, that's when people, I think, start getting offended on the left. And the fact that it's the right left thing is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life, because
I wouldn't call Robert Kennedy Jr. a member of the right. Like, I saw Naomi Wolf was on Steve Bannon's show the other day. Like, there's this. Well, yeah, and the anti-vax right and left have united. This is the one thing that's and there's always the heterodox left crowd that's kind of the Glenn Greenwalds that are not only on this subject, but that are kind of, there's a realignment going on across the board that the pandemic has kind of spurred politically that I think is interesting.
Correct. Yeah, it's like Ben Shapiro was all for mandating vaccines, several years ago, and it was something else, and it was affecting his family, right? So it's interesting.
Do you remember what it was?
I don't remember what. I think it was.
It was because it was in California, and all these anti-vax liberals in California not getting vaccinated.
No, this was before. Yeah, this was before the. This virus. It was some other thing.
I'm sure someone will fact check Rhinehold, but
it was Ben Shapiro.
It was just the basic viruses. He was talking about how people should just get these vaccines in California.
Right. And he's not been anti-vax. That's sort of the annoying thing is that if you have these conversations and you're anti-government action, you're, Trump
is pro-vax. So.
To his peril lately. That's sort of the worst thing that Democrats do lately is that they just sort of lump people into a group and call everybody stupid, and Joe Rogan's just an idiot, and the Supreme Court sounded stupid like Joe Rogan. It's like people who disagree with you or are on a different side on a single issue aren't stupid. They probably have, Like I was listening to Opening Arguments, which is a good podcast on the left breaking down legal issues. So if you want to understand a liberal progressive point of view on a lot of legal issues, that's a podcast that I will go to because it's a lawyer kind of breaking down a lot of things. And the whole episode about the vaccine mandate stuff was just how stupid they were, and they're jokers, and they just made it up. And it's like they didn't even read the stupid thing where they come out with well-reasoned arguments, and and it's just that insulting attitude of you're all just stupid and dumb, and it doesn't persuade people. It just pushes people further into their identitarian camp.
Yeah, or statist or woke or
right.
Commie or look, people talk about the kind of stupid questions that some of the justices on the right had during the thing, but there was also a bunch of the Fox News was going crazy because of some of the questions that Kagan had.
Well,
yeah, she misstated a number that she had read wrong, and
Sotomayor said there was 100,000 kids with COVID in hospitals. There's 5,000, right. And they lost their mind. That wasn't even the troubling. The troubling one was where Sotomayor in oral arguments argued that OSHA has policing powers when federal agencies do not have policing powers unless specifically granted to them by the Constitution. It's not just an inherent thing. It is it's a regulatory power, which is different than a policing power in the American system of law. So, go ahead, Harry.
I'm just going to say, Sotomayor is probably learning this past month of why, Clarence Thomas doesn't open his mouth and write something down first. So he can write it down, look at it, and go, do I want to say it like this?
Yeah, the reaction to this has just been, oh, this is great. I don't know. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive into this and read the opinion and just kind of give you some highlights from it so you understand the arguments made by both sides of this opinion, so you can kind of understand what happened and get the full details. We will do that here in just a moment after we hear from our advertisers.
Still getting around to that fix on your car? You got this. On eBay, you'll find millions of parts guaranteed to fit. Doesn't matter if it's a major engine repair or your first time swapping your windshield wipers. eBay has that part you need, ready to click perfectly into place for changes big and small. Loud or quiet, find all the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. But you already know that. eBay. Things, people, love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Welcome back to the Chris Spangle Show. Thank you so much for being here. We are talking about the Supreme Court's decision on the OSHA mandate to force vaccination and testing on every workplace in America, creating hardships for American workers. Roughly 2/3 of the American workforce. It would be punishable by $13,000 if it was an accident, $136,000 if it was a willful violation. And you didn't, what people need to understand, you wouldn't have a choice. This would be in perpetuity. This would be every booster shot. It would be testing, whether there's not testing or not. If you can't get a test, let's say you work for Ruby Tuesdays as a server. Okay, technically you work for a company that's over 100 employees. You're a server. You've really gone through a hard time through COVID. The tax credit for kids, the extra money that you've been getting ended today. You did not get that payment in your bank account today for your $300 per kid. So if you're a server and you're not vaccinated or you don't want to get the booster, then you are going to have to be tested every single week. And if you can't get a test, you just don't work. So, this is an incredible hardship for a lot of businesses that are already suffering supply chain issues. So many different companies sued to the Supreme Court, and were kind of lumped into one general argument. And this came down when? January 13th. The decision to kill off this regulation was 3-3-3. Okay, so it was 6-3. So you had you had the per curiam, which is the decision of the court, and it's unnamed justices. But Roberts, Kavanaugh, and who's the other one? I think it was I'm blanking on it. My COVID brain.
Yeah.
Gorsuch and Thomas and Alito all filed their own concurring opinion, which means they voted with them. And then there were the three dissenters, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. Now, the decision basically starts with a summary of what happened, which we've kind of told you, that, testing at their own expense weekly, wearing a mask every workday. There are some carve-outs, like if you work exclusively at home and never come in. And essentially, it went to the Fifth Circuit Court, and the Fifth Circuit Court entered a stay. And then the cases were consolidated before the Sixth Circuit Court, where OSHA's ruled to take, or basically the Sixth, excuse me, I'm out of practice. The Sixth Circuit Court, say that 8 times fast, said, no, OSHA can proceed with the mandate. You may have seen those headlines. Now, the applicants are seeking emergency relief from the court. So this decision is not a final decision. It is, think of it like a test to see what the Supreme Court will decide if it makes it to the Supreme Court, because this is an emergency relief from the court. Now, the decision reads, agreeing that applicants are likely to prevail, we grant their applications and stay the rule. Now, what that means is that the people that are suing the government are likely to win if this case were to come to the Supreme Court. And so they're granting their application, which means they find their case to be worthy, and they're staying the actual decision. A court's stay means that they are deciding in favor of those suing and deciding against the government. And so the government has to cease what it is doing. Now, then they get into what is the nature of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Now, I will tell you that I have a lifelong deep hatred for OSHA. I think it is a worthless organization. I lost a day's worth of income when I was working as a cleaner on construction sites because we didn't have the proper MDS sheets for Dawn dish soap. So if you're working on a construction site, then you have to have these sheets that tell you what is in the chemicals and how it interacts with people. And if you don't have your updated sheets, then you get fined. And so we just couldn't show up that day because they were inspecting the job site. And ever since then, that was one of the first inklings where I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Why would you force me to lose a day's pay over a Dawn dish soap? It's obviously not dangerous to humans. I mean, don't drink it, but like we were washing windows with it. And it's like so many other government regulations and agencies. And I think people are starting to wake up to this. When there's a moral panic that takes place. People pass a regulation, give a new power to a bureaucracy, create a new bureaucracy. Then people feel that they have done some good, that someone somewhere is taking care of it. But in reality, what is being done is you are burdening an employee of some company at a low level with paperwork. Paperwork that no one will ever check because the regulatory agency doesn't have the people to do it. So in Indiana, they're trying to pass a law that forces teachers in Indiana to put their curriculum up for like a long period of time, like a year. A lot of teachers don't know their curriculum for a full year. They have to fill out all this paperwork that parents are able to come in and check. It's like in radio, you have to have these certain filings, your public file, so any person can walk in at any time to check these public files for radio stations. Do you know how many people ever come in or know about the ability to check these public files at our radio stations? It's zero. Do you know how many parents are going to come in and check the curriculum? Probably in the beginning, 1, 2, 3, And then after a year, people will forget it. But the paperwork will forever be there and will forever be a burden on the employee. The vaccine mandates in these cities at restaurants. Who is actually checking these vaccine cards? Nobody. Okay? Because your regular restaurant employee or manager does not want to be a cop. And so they're not going to be standing at the door checking people's vaccine cards. But everybody feels like they've done something. Somebody somewhere feels like government is regulating workplaces. They're figuring out tests. The CDC will take care of us when the pandemic hits. And, by the way, this is not a conspiracy theory. It's in Scott Gottlieb's new book around COVID. You can go read about, he outlines all of this. We've talked about it on the program. When the pandemic hits and they get the sequencing and testing at the CDC, they centralize it. They tell everybody you can't build tests unless we approve it. And then the companies say, we want to build tests. This is an emergency. Let us have the sequencing so we can build tests. CDC says to these companies, this is our intellectual property. No. So these companies then have to go to Germany, get the sequencing to build tests because the CDC wanted to own the intellectual property. So these agencies, we all sort of think that we're all in on it, right? Like, we're all in it together. Government is we all get together and do things in the name of government to save people and protect people. And then we never go back and do our homework and check up on this stuff to see if it's being done. And if we did, we'd probably find that nobody's being helped in so many different situations, but you've burdened people with regulations that aren't being enforced, that aren't being watched. And this is another thing. Like, how is OSHA going to go to enforce this? Well, if they're going to enlist public health departments to spy on companies, well, that might be a good way to do it. But otherwise, it's just probably not going to end up being enforced. So they talk about the nature of OSHA, which is part of the Department of Labor under the supervision of its secretary. And OSHA is tasked with ensuring occupational safety that is, quote, safe and healthful working conditions. Now, such standards must be reasonably necessary or appropriate to provide safe and healthful employment. Now, they said that under emergency standards, emergency temporary standards, they had the authority, the OSHA had the authority to do this testing. The court, in Gorsuch's opinion, basically argues what we said recently about it. An emergency isn't take 2 months to figure out how to implement it and another 2 months to start enforcing it. If it's an emergency, you're abusing the notion of emergency. Emergency is a power plant is on fire and melting down, and the government, to coordinate resources, needs to manage that particular location. That is an OSHA emergency. Prior to the emergence of COVID-19, the secretary had used this power just 9 times before. And of those 9 emergency rules, 6 were challenged in court, and only 1 of those were upheld in full. And I'm reading from the actual Supreme Court decision. So on September 9th, Biden announces this plan to require vaccinations. The rule was to increase vaccination rates at businesses all across America and to impose vaccine requirements on about 100 million Americans. Now, after a 2-month delay, the Secretary of Labor issued the promised emergency standard, and there are narrow exemptions for employees who work remotely 100% of the time, but these exemptions are largely illusionary. And go on to talk about how 9% of landscapers and groundskeepers qualify as working outside exclusively. They do go inside. So the idea that you're exempting outdoor employees or people who work from home, it doesn't make sense because everybody at some point, if you work from home like me, goes into the office once a week. So then it stands. So it drew no distinctions based on different industries. It was acting as what did they say? It was acting as a blunt instrument to force people to do it. And it was treating linemen who work outside just like medics and meat packers. The employer must verify the vaccination status of each employee and maintain proof of it, which is a privacy nightmare, Harry. And then they talk about some of the other standards, just kind of jumping forth here. It was so prior to the consolidation of these situations, the case held that the mandate was likely exceeded OSHA's statutory authority and raised separation of powers concerns in the absence of a clear delegation from Congress, and was not properly tailored to the risks facing different types of workers and workplaces. There were 60 petitioners, of which the Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro were one, but they keep saying they won, and they were not the case, which is sort of, and I'm not going to say it's a lie, but it's definitely good marketing. Let's put it that way.
It's called marketing. It's
right,
lying,
yeah.
It's marketing.
Which I just sort of expected better of him, but okay.
Come on.
I know. Go ahead, Rhinehold.
He's got a business to run, okay?
I know. Listen, I should do the same thing. Next time we're suing. Mm-hmm. We're suing everybody. I don't care if I'm telling the truth or not. We're suing. I need the lift here, okay?
Need the free clicks.
Yeah. The Sixth Circuit Court concluded that a stay of the rule was not justified. We disagree. The Secretary has ordered 84 million Americans to either obtain a vaccine or undergo medical testing at their own expense. This is no, quote, everyday exercise of federal power. And then they refer to some case law. It is instead a significant encroachment into the lives and health of a vast number of employees. We expect Congress, quote, we expect Congress to speak clearly when authorizing an agency to exercise the powers of vast economic and political significance, which is from a case in 2021, which is a doctrine that we will talk about in Gorsuch's reply. There can be little doubt that the OSHA's mandate qualifies an exercise of such authority. Now, they go on to say no provision of the Act addresses public health more generally, which falls outside of OSHA's sphere of expertise. So they then go on to argue that OSHA is a workplace safety organization. It is not a public health agency. And so what the court has generally come down, this specific court over the last couple of years, is a doctrine that basically says that an agency has to have authority given to it by Congress to take too much power. So as we all are, as libertarians are not surprised by, agencies start to take more power than is written into the original act. So you have a lot of these agencies like the EPA or OSHA that were formed in the 70s or 80s, and their statutes are very kind of broad. And one doctrine of the court has been to say, well, okay, when you've overreached your power, we're going to kill it by saying that this isn't in the statute. You don't have the authority to do it. The Solicitor General, the opinion goes on to write, does not dispute that OSHA is limited to regulating work-related dangers. Although COVID-19 is a risk that occurs in many workplaces, it is not an occupational hazard in most. COVID-19 can and does spread at home, in schools, during sporting events, and everywhere else that people gather. That kind of universal risk is no different from day-to-day dangers that all face from crime, air pollution, or any number of communicable diseases. Permitting OSHA to regulate the hazards of daily life, simply because most Americans have jobs and face the same risks while on the clock, would significantly expand OSHA's regulatory authority without clear congressional authorization. The dissent contends that OSHA's mandate is comparable to a fire or sanitation regulation imposed by the agency. So the dissent basically went on to write that, yes, indeed, this is a workplace hazard. This is where many people will be exposed to COVID-19. I go to the store, which a lot of studies show you can't get it at a store just kind of walking past someone. But I do go to my office, and those are like the two places I go, right? And have for 3 years, largely because I've just become cheap. But, so
the magic grocery store doesn't allow us to get COVID there.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, the argument that, it's not specifically the dissent basically argues that that's where most people are going to get it. But the vaccine, they continue to write, mandate is strikingly unlike the workplace regulations that OSHA has typically imposed. A vaccination, after all, quote, cannot be undone at the end of the working day. And contrary to the dissent's contention, imposing a vaccine mandate on 84 million Americans in response to a worldwide pandemic is simply not, quote, part of what the agency was built for. We do not doubt, for example, that OSHA could regulate researchers who work with COVID-19. And they go on to continue, OSHA's indiscriminate approach fails to account for this crucial distinction between occupational risk and risk more generally. And accordingly, the mandate takes on the character of a general public health measure rather than occupational safety or health standards. It is telling that OSHA, in its half-century of existence, has never before adopted a broad public health regulation of this kind, addressing a threat that is untethered in any casual sense from the workplace. The equities do not justify withholding interim relief. We are told by the states and the employers that OSHA's mandate will force them to incur billions of dollars in unrecoverable compliance costs and will cause hundreds of thousands of employees to leave their job. There's something called the takings clause in the Constitution that if the government takes something from you, they must provide restitution. That's why many, even some conservatives and libertarians, argued that the stimulus bills with the $1,200 checks were takings. They took your job from you, and so they had to give you money back. And we told them they couldn't fly, so we need to bail out the airlines. I'll let you figure out if you agree with that or not. I think that's a slippery slope, in my opinion. I think that once you get into that, then they can take whatever they want. And, oh, well, we gave you money, and we've seen it with eminent domain. Like, well, your house isn't really your property. It's really our property, but we gave you money. And it doesn't change the morality just because they've given you compensation. For its part, the federal government says the mandate will save over 6,500 lives and prevent hundreds of thousands of hospitalizations. It is not our role to weigh such trade-offs. In our system of government, that is the responsibility of those chosen by the people through the democratic process. Although Congress has indisputably given OSHA the power to regulate occupational dangers, it has not given that agency broad power to regulate public health. Requiring the vaccination of 84 million Americans selected simply because they work for employers with more than 100 employees certainly falls in the latter category. Let's see. So that was Robertson, Kavanaugh, and man, why can't I think of the other one? Help me out here, guys. Because Thomas, Gorsuch, and Alito, I just need to look at their faces. Supreme Court, and I can tell you who decided.
Their faces thing that gets me.
What?
Oh, you can tell if I look at their faces.
Yeah. So on the Supreme Court is Sotomayor. So it was Coney Barrett was in conjunction with Kavanaugh and Roberts in writing the official opinion. Some people think that Kavanaugh wrote that opinion. Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch signed on to a concurring opinion, which means that they agree and vote with the majority opinion, but they have their own unique take on it. And the main opinion is something called listen, I am a generalist here. I am not a specialist in Supreme Court law, but per curiam was a term I had never heard, but I did a lot of reading and homework for the show, so you don't have to. Now, the concurring opinion by Thomas Gorsuch and Alito spends a lot of time about who gets to decide on these things. Is it the federal government and the agencies? Is it the states? Is it the employers? And they go back to basically reaffirm something called the and I know I'm going to say it wrong, and I highlighted it, but I don't. Oh, the Major Questions Doctrine. Excuse me. So the Major Questions Doctrine is sort of outlined in what I just said. It basically says that if it's not in the Constitution, if it's not expressly written by Congress, then you can't do it if it's too broad. And weirdly, like in the other case, the CMS case, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid I forget what the S is, but basically there was another case that they decided on where they said 10 million American healthcare workers can be forced to get vaccinated because these local hospitals, nursing homes, they take Medicare and Medicaid money, they take federal dollars, and you, as a result, take the strings attached. And that has been written out by Congress, and so it's okay for them to do it because this is part of democracy, and the Democratic branch has said that these agencies have these powers, and OSHA, in the other case, does not have these powers. It's too broad and too expansive. And it basically talks about the line, we expect Congress to speak clearly if it wishes to assign an executive agency's decision of vast economic and political significance. And the mandate for OSHA failed that test. And then go on to talk about how this basically was a legislative workaround. And Chief of Staff to Joe Biden, Ron Klain, tweeted that out. He retweeted somebody saying that, which they did not appreciate. Now, Gorsuch goes on to write, as the agency itself explained to a federal court less than 2 years ago, the statute does not authorize OSHA to issue sweeping health standards. That's right. There was a court case recently where OSHA argued that they didn't have the power to issue sweeping health standards that affect workers' lives outside of the workplace. That was a brief for the Labor Department in an AFL-CIO case in 2020. But that's exactly what they want to do now. So historically, such matters have been regulated at the state level by authorities who enjoy broader and more general governmental powers. So a state can, in the United States governmental system, say we're banning vaccine mandates as they've done in Indiana, or they can say we're enforcing vaccine mandates in our state, which no state has done. Will we see California or New York now have their own vaccine mandate? Maybe. But the reason that they want it done on the federal level is because they don't want people leaving from Philadelphia to Newcastle, Indiana. So, but what they basically
or
are...
Fishers.
Or Fishers. And they talk a little bit about the non-delegation doctrine, which is something that is actually very close to the major questions doctrine. In all, what I hear in this is the federal agency can't usurp the power of the Democratic branch. You hear democracy taking place. So all these people who are fretting about the end of democracy are calling this opinion stupid. Now, Gorsuch writes, why does the major questions doctrine matter? It ensures that the national government's power to make laws that govern us remain where Article 1 of the Constitution says it belongs, with the people's elected representatives. If administrative agencies seek to regulate the daily lives and liberties of millions of Americans, the doctrine says they must at least be able to trace that power to a clear grant of authority from Congress. The dissent, and many liberal commentators have said they can trace it back to the president. And the president is telling them they have this authority, and he's the one they can hold accountable. And Gorsuch argues, no, that power really belongs to the Congress and not the president under the Constitution. And the people need to be able to hold their people accountable. And both are designed to protect the separation of powers and ensure that any new laws governing the lives of Americans are subject to the robust democratic processes of the Constitution. The non-delegation doctrine ensures democratic accountability by preventing Congress from intentionally delegating its legislative powers to unelected officials. Sometimes lawmakers may be tempted to delegate power to agencies to reduce the degrees to which they will be held accountable for unpopular actions. Woo! The question, he ends, is not for us how to respond to the pandemic, but who holds the power to do so. The answer is clear. Under the law as it stands today, that power rests with the states and Congress, not OSHA. In saying that this much, we do not impugn the intentions behind the agency's mandate, which is side-eye for saying we do. Instead, we only discharge our duty to enforce the law's demand when it comes to the question of who may govern. Those 84 million Americans. Respecting those demands may be trying in times of stress, but if the court were to abide them only in more tranquil conditions, declarations of emergencies would never end, and the liberties of our Constitution's separation of powers seeks to preserve what little amount is left, I guess. So, how do you two react to the majority opinions before we go on to the dispute? The dissent.
Okay.
Go first, right?
On the aspect of it does show like it's a little bit like, okay, this is maybe crossing the line a little bit too much, is like the political cowardice of like a certain political party, because their unwillingness to like call a vote or put a bill together to do this thing. They want to just do it by executive order, then cross over and just allow the regulatory branch to do something instead of just like, how about you let your people vote on this thing? Most people probably will go along with it if you put some votes to it, let them actually hold their elected people accountable. But even though a certain political party has control of, the House and most of the Senate and the top of the executive branch, no vote will be, it's political suicide of the midterms coming up if they actually had to pull that vote for it. People may want it in their fear bubbles, but when the rubber meets the road, no one wants to actually sign their name to any of it.
Right. Rhinehold?
So I have a fair bit to say on what is going on so far. So first of all, what we have learned is that there is power that the Supreme Court has identified and affirmed that there is power for the federal government to initiate mandates to every individual in the United States. It just has to be done the right way. And that's where you get into these people who are saying that this is a win. This isn't a win for anybody other than some minor legal stuff on whether or not OSHA has this power or not. It's like, you can still do this. This isn't saying that this isn't possible. And as a libertarian, we don't like that. I mean, we want to be able to say that the federal government can't do this, but we've seen throughout history that they have, and they can, and they do all the time. Yeah. I mean, look what a lot of things Nixon did. Nixon did so many things like this where he initiated mandates as a president, not even as Congress, that it pretty much informed forming the Libertarian Party to begin with, right?
Yeah.
So
taking us off the gold standard, forming the EPA. I think OSHA...
Yeah, just telling people what temperature they could run their air conditioners and heating systems at.
OSHA was formed by Nixon, yeah. I mean, he was
national records or national speed limits. There were all kinds of things we have
bill.
That we take. So right now we have a government that basically can do whatever it wants to, including even things that we think are good but are bad as well. Like Ron DeSantis is trying to make it a law that that a private company can't require mandates for their employees.
Yeah.
Right. That's just as bad as saying that they have to.
No,
right?
I mean, from a purely libertarian standpoint, a state government telling a private employer that they can or can't have a vaccine mandate, that's just wrong from a purely libertarian standpoint. Like, bodily autonomy factors into that, though, but you have the ability to voluntarily associate or not associate with an employer. You can quit and go find a new job. And millions of Americans are doing that right now. And I think what's been great with the Great Reset, the Great Resignation, or whatever it's called, people are now kind of going, I don't need to be beholden to this job. I can look around a little bit and do better for myself. And I think that's really good. I mean, I'm happy about that. We'll have to talk about the Great Resignation at some point. But, you have the ability. If you are forced by the federal government to do something you have no other state to move to, they're violating your bodily autonomy with a treatment that you can't have undone. A treatment that does carry some risk. I know we're not allowed to talk about the risk, which only makes all of this more insane, that you can't talk about, something that carries a risk and makes people more suspicious of it. But the reality is, this is like, Rhinehold, you're an old-time libertarian. We used to go to Borders bookstore in 2009 and have our meetup with 50 people and have these hypothetical arguments about what ifs. If the government did this, how would we react? What's the libertarian position on X? And like vaccine mandates were always like the one. And there would always kind of be a couple libertarians who'd be like, yeah, but where does your right to infect me begin and end? And then others would be like, you're violating my bodily autonomy. And it's just sort of crazy that we've gotten to a point where those hypothetical government overreach arguments from 2009 as we're all like reading The Revolution and Liberty Defined and arguing what we read because we don't know anything else, has come true. And that's really where it comes down. Like, but so does your employer have a right to violate your bodily autonomy? I mean, they're paying for your health care. You're choosing. They can choose to not associate with you. It is extremely unfair. And most people do, and that's what the dissent writes about, is that basically people talk a good game, but they don't actually quit. The hospital system here, the biggest hospital system, IU Health, has 33,000 employees. By the end of their mandate period, they fired, I think, 300 people. Most of them were groundskeepers, were not essential employees. But then you have more rural hospitals, like a hospital of someone that I know that works, in a suburban county's hospital system of Indianapolis. They're in court arguing, hey, 25% of their staff is going to quit over the mandate for this hospital. And those are people we can't afford to have quit right now. But in other industries, it's like less than 2%, 1% that which comes to one of my founding principles in analyzing the news. People will always put their paycheck before a lot of other things. Like, there's more options right now than ever before, but at the end of the day, a lot of people are not willing. That's why I don't buy into a lot of the domestic terrorism talk, because like, is a dude really going to get rid of, he's got a $120,000 Ford F-250, a McMansion in the suburbs. He's going to put the snake and what's the Punisher shit on his truck, but he's not willing to actually go spend 25 years in jail for domestic terrorism because he's not willing to give up his comfort. And that's how the vaccine mandate has kind of rolled out too. Like, people like Rhinehold, like you just said, are not really willing to just quit. They'll not comply. They're hoping that their employer and the Supreme Court will save them, and not really kind of taking control of their own destiny here.
Yeah. I mean, we put up with like drug testing all the time, right? So,
yeah. But
been going on?
Listen, drug testing is fundamentally different than forcing you to get a vaccine.
Is it though?
Yeah, absolutely. Pissing in a cup. What happens
if I get cancer?
Pissing in a cup is different than taking a vaccine. Like
but you miss what I'm saying though. Let's say that drug that they're saying that I can't take is what I need to help me. So I'm not allowed to do that. So if I get cancer and I need to go through chemotherapy and I need marijuana helps that situation out, I'm not allowed to take it because I would lose my job. So there is.
So you're basically saying like these unfairnesses and inequities are across the board, and it's just part of life.
We've been living through them for 100 years in this country because there's been mandates for there were mandates for kids going to school and getting vaccines. There were vaccine mandates when I was growing up that nobody we didn't have this big fight about. So people are accepting of this stuff. It's just that now it's become a political issue. So since it's a political issue, everybody wants to weigh in. But in the end of the day, people are going to do what they think is the right thing to do, and they're not going to fight it that much. It's going to end up being something where if they wanted to, they right now could put in a law through Congress to say that everybody can do mandates, or OSHA has this power, and it's done. It moves on, and they could probably get that passed through. Except for the filibuster is the only thing probably stopping that from happening.
Yeah. And when it comes to peeing in a cup, most companies only doing it because of the, either regulatory information or some other nondescript company that makes them, or some sort of a contract that forces them to do that. Most of them don't care. And most of those lab technicians know that probably 99.9% of the pee they're testing is fake pee. I feel bad for that lab technician that went to school for all this stuff and they test fake pee all the time. That's fake.
I got hit on a test like that once. I was working a second job at a facility and mail sorting facility, and I ended up getting hit with a drug test where they came back and said, well, there were some problems with the drug test. I'm like, well, what? And we're like, well, it could be something, nothing. But I said, what else could it be? He says, well, it shows that you could be doing heroin.
Did you eat a poppy seed bagel like Elaine?
Yeah, I had like a poppy seed something like Euro with that. It was just like,
you know what? You really are this.
I'm not doing.
You are this show's Elaine. I'm just gonna say it. We've all been thinking it.
But it's all crazy like that where we should be letting people interact with each other and making their own decisions and doing what's best. Have something that's out there giving out good information that we all can all go off of. But when you start politicizing everything, it's like you're saying that the cloth masks don't work. I'm like, no, they work, but not nearly as effectively as we would like the other ones to.
How many times have we talked about it on this show? The resentment and the backlash that was caused by government action. That look at Australia's COVID numbers with Omicron. It's not that much. Look at California's COVID numbers and Indiana's COVID numbers. They're not that much different. And I just think there's got to be at some point some level of humility to say that maybe we don't have the ability to control the spread like we wish we could. And the Barrington Declaration, Bhattacharya had this right from the beginning that we need to protect the vulnerable and take some basic mitigation steps and get a treatment like the vaccine as soon as possible. But the masks and the 6 feet rules and the Lysoling your packages, a lot of that stuff hasn't really done that much. And enshrining that in law is crazy, right? Well, you haven't gotten COVID. Why do you think that is?
Because I am socially distanced from people.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't work. It's common sense. A communicable disease needs community.
Right.
But there's also like people in 50% of the COVID cases early on were people who had not left their apartment. It was coming in through the air ducts, the HVAC systems, which we didn't fully comprehend till later. Zuckerberg's Liberty meme.
People were talking about this. We were getting that information. I was going through the ducts from like people from Korea. People were talking about this. South Korea was talking about this. You need to. That was the whole like box air filter situation.
Yeah,
that was coming. But you couldn't have these conversations on the American internet. They're censoring a lot of that. There's some people still talking about that. But a lot of you like I've been out and about. Like I said, like I've been out and about and I've done things. I've gone around people. I've sat in a yoga room full of 36 people, all breathing very heavily. Okay. Most of this pandemic. Okay. So
he's a very heavy breather.
But here's what
nobody breathes heavier. Nobody breathes heavier than Harry. Yeah. I mean, the reality is
like into this. What I want to say is that I think it's foolish to assume that this instance and what's going on right now is changing people's minds to being anti-government. It's not.
Why do you say that?
Correct.
Because people are going to still default back to all the other things that they see as government being good and things that it should be doing. They're not able to make in their brain the break of government should be taking care of this. Government should be doing this. They're just going to say government's doing it wrong now. We got the wrong people in charge now. We need other people to be in charge.
I mean, for me, it's like I've always just like I'm going to get COVID. I need to prepare myself as best as possible. Mm-hmm. Whether it's medical treatments or exercising or eating well or like the cardiovascular strain that I experienced when I got Delta in September was significant, and it's made me. It really was an issue. I had a high resting heart rate till really December. I had a lot of long COVID effects, and it made me realize I've got to get some stuff. I've got to get more prepared for the next variant because I'm probably going to get every variant. Fortunately, I have not gotten Omicron at this point. I expect to, and so it's just sort of like, from the beginning of the pandemic, what we've been saying is you cannot rely on the government to protect you. You cannot rely on the government to financially support you. The best they can do is $1,200 every 9 months. You, at the end of the day, are in control of your own life. You are responsible for you and your family. You are responsible for your income streams, your health. And you need to evaluate information as best as possible, and other people shouldn't be interfering with your ability to do that. Joe Rogan should be able to interview whoever he wants. But the fact that people don't want you to talk about what was said means there's not good fact-checking about it. I have no idea if those guys, I listened to them, they sounded convincing, but I have no way to verify that. I'm not a doctor. I don't know anything. I want to see other doctors talk about that conversation or have them have direct conversations with those people so I can evaluate the information. That's been the whole argument. That's been the biggest problem in the pandemic, is that people are trying to, like, it's hard to figure out what is good information and what is not, and people need the ability to make the best decision. Our argument is the argument that Don Rainwater adopted here in Indiana, and in a three-way race got 12% in a statewide race. And it was the government's role here is to give good information to allow people and business owners to make decisions for them and themselves. Business owners will take the safety of employees and their customers more seriously than a government bureaucrat will. If you talk to any business owner, they have been extremely worried about keeping their people safe, which is why a lot of employers want to mandate the vaccine. They don't want them being one of the 97, like in Indiana released a number, 97.1% of the people that died under 40 for COVID were unvaccinated. But that's a negotiation that you have with your employer. Thank you for being paternalistic, but is that your role? Right? And so Rainwater just always said, like, the role of the government is to give us good information, reliable information to make good decisions. But once you start invading people's lives and shutting down businesses and putting out mandates, resentment takes place. People start doing the opposite. It's an American character. There is just a hardcore percentage of Americans that will never get the vaccine. It doesn't matter how much information you put in front of them. It doesn't matter how you can't persuade them because government prescribed it. And it is just like, it's like the sticking the stick in the bicycle wheels meme, where people who don't get that, don't understand their fellow Americans because they don't talk to them, get mad at that behavior, those choices, and then double down on it by shaming them, calling them stupid, like trying to take them out from various forms of regular life because they won't take the vaccine. All that does is just reinforces it. It just keeps it going. It keeps the resentment going. And it's just, nobody gets the cycle that we're in, and they can't seem to stop themselves. Nobody looks at censorship of information, like trying to censor Alex Jones. Nobody steps back and goes, gee, when we removed him from all these platforms in 2018, we thought it would stop. Instead, it radicalized an entire political party that has power across the country. Mm-hmm. The opposite effect took place. All right, but nobody says, let's stop doing that thing that obviously is not working. More people are falling kind of, into that camp. It just blows me away that people don't stop and look at this stuff. They're so driven by their political ideology and the people around them, as opposed to kind of stepping back and evaluating it.
I would counter, too, what you said about the government's position being to give us good information. I don't think that's the government's job either. I think we should have qualified, trusted organizations that are not politically invested in any way be where we get that information at. I always use the example of Underwriters Laboratories. We don't have laws against a lot of electrical requirements that we have out there right now, because Underwriters Laboratories has done a good job of regulating that stuff. Yeah, with good information and inspections for the past 80 years or whatever. How long they've been in business and doing this. So we didn't need government to do that for us because we had a body who was doing it. So we need more bodies doing that. We need more people putting together organizations that we can trust for that information.
Johns Hopkins early on did that. What do I need the CDC for?
Well, the other issue is, like,
Harry,
I'm going to bring...
Harry, you got real hot. Your mic's real hot. Turn it down.
I didn't touch anything. I think I probably just got excited. I see. One of the things I would just say is, and I've been trying to tell people this, a lot of this misinformation also does come from up top. It's Fauci's fault and the lay media, but not how you think about it. I think the simple fact that the government was presenting one doctor, one person as the source of truth, instead of like a panel of scientists. And this is how, usually, how most sciences are discussed. It's a panel of people. But the thing is, the thing I used to get people to really want to get the vaccine was the panel of doctors doing the Ask Me Anything for the Mayo Clinic. It wasn't one doctor for the Mayo Clinic. It was a panel of doctors. Ask me anything. Tell me, what questions do you have? What makes you not want to take this thing? Or if you've taken it, you have questions about after you've taken it, we will answer it as a panel together. And you would watch them also have disagreements with each other on the panel, but they were, but they were talking with each other. Like, well, I don't think that. And just like, and they would talk about the chances like that. That type of conversation is what the world needed at that time. Not one person in front of a podium trying to say they're the science and trying to get that, because the lay media, it's not. That's not how some people like.
Can you think of anything more damaging to, like, just as I consider myself a pretty middle of the road normal person, but when Fauci like says, when you're arguing with me, you're arguing with science, or calls that senator a effing moron, like. I don't know. There's some.
He is right about that. That was
maybe, but
that was about his financials and stuff like that. That wasn't about.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But the reality, there's one thing that Americans will kill you for, and it's a lack of humility. Mm-hmm. Unless apparently you're Trump, which is why a lot of Republicans don't get what their other Republicans are doing. It's like if you have gotten to the point where you've bought into your own press, as much as we all love to talk about the leftist media and how in the bag they are, and they are, we all know it. It's irrefutable. Oh, yeah. Cuomo got too big for his britches, didn't he? And like there's just something that Americans, they cannot stand. They love a car wreck, and the trigger is always a lack of humility.
What's funny is that, but here's the thing, what you're saying right there is that the media turned on Cuomo because he crossed the line. The right media won't do that for Trump.
I know. Well, the vaccine over break. I mean, the Candace Owen interview and the booing with Bill O'Reilly. Like what Trump said was. Let me see if I can pull it up, because when you listen to what he said, it wasn't wrong. Like nope. It sounded like what a lot of like. It wasn't conspiratorial. It wasn't any of that stuff. It was. It was, hey, I did a good job with it. Trump booed.
The Candace Owens thing is just like, but the other thing also is with going to the point of you're talking about how some people are like having that break for the government. No, right now we're in that lull period where a lot of people on the right and on the left too like to grab the libertarian label when it's safe to be a libertarian right now. But the moment election season starts really ramping up, then the L words just erupt from their mouth. Like, nope.
And how many of those people? How many of those people who are anti-government and mandates and things like that are walking around with Back the Blue stickers and talk about how great the government is and we should be defending, all our military operations? And these are people who are okay with government intrusion into your lives and government authoritarianism, as long as it doesn't affect them negatively in any way. And that's where you get into the issue, is a lot of people who like to claim that they're libertarians are really just people who want the government to leave them alone, but they want the freedom to tell other people how to live their lives.
Exactly. A lot of people walking around with red and black flags from Antifa are doing the exact same thing. We hate Antifa, but blue no matter who. We'll trust that tribe. But it's like, come on, I thought you were against government, but now you're for these government formats. Can you get a little consistency? Would be nice, just a little,
all right, so let me see if I can. I can't get this into my computer, so I'm just gonna turn up the volume on my speakers. So sorry that it's not the great sounding.
But look, we did something that was historic. We saved tens of millions of lives worldwide. We, together, all of us, not me, we got a vaccine done, 3 vaccines done, and tremendous therapeutics like Regeneron and other things that have saved a lot of lives. We got a vaccine done in less than 9 months. It was supposed to take from 5 to 12 years. Because of that vaccine, millions and millions of people. I think this would have been the Spanish flu of 1917, where up to 100 million people died. This was going to ravage the country far beyond what it is right now. Take credit for it. It's a great, what we've done is historic. Don't let them take it away. Don't take it away from ourselves. You're playing right into their hands when you sort of like, oh, the vaccine. If you don't want to take it, you shouldn't be forced to take it. No mandates, but take credit, because we saved tens of millions of lives. Take credit. Don't let them take that away from you.
Okay, so the president made news.
Do you agree with that? Right?
Both the president and I are vaxxed, and did you get the booster?
Yes.
I got it too. Okay, so...
Don't. That's all. There's a very tiny group of it.
And that he kind of like is hitting on something that I just didn't get last year. It's like, why are you running on the culture war stuff and when your economy is great? Why are you you're the one that put, like, it's so funny to see DeSantis come out and say, well, I trusted Trump, but he was the one that initiated the shutdowns and did all those bailouts. I'm like, is he listening to this program? Trump was the one that, like, it was so weird because he initiated the lockdowns and then he's super anti-lockdown warrior man by the time the election rolls around. It's just like, dude, run on the vaccine. Like, that's popular. People see it at that point as like a saving grace. Like, it's going to get us out of this. Like, it's the one thing that he effectively managed, which I'm sure he had nothing to do with,
just to get out of the way and let them do it. And that's how it solved it, was we left government out of the way and let them take care of it.
Right.
And he could have pushed the Democrats into being the anti-vaxxers because they were on board. They were ready to say, we're not going to trust this vaccine. We're not going to take this vaccine. All that stuff was happening right around the election. And he backed off and started going on talking about other different things and then lost the election. And of course, now all the Democrats are saying, get the vaccine, because the right started saying not to take it. And it was just a weird jump to see. It was lined up to be the other way.
Right.
So,
yeah,
because it's all political. It's what I don't understand. Yeah, why is this political? It makes no sense to me.
So,
because everything is. We've ratcheted and ramped everything
because
up
everything is like, it's pro wrestling. So I listened to Alex Jones for like the week after that he said that stuff, and like, listen, I don't know that any mainstream reporter listens to this, but Alex Jones is not the person you need to be afraid of. Like, they all pretend that Alex Jones is, like, I listen to him on a regular basis, and he tries, like, you have to fact check everything he says. He's got his own worldview that I don't agree with, but he's like portrayed in the media so differently than he is on his show. If you read the New Yorker, like, the people that are like the how do I put this? The way that Alex Jones is thought of by people who don't listen to him and reported in the media, like, that actual person, those media figures, you can't find anywhere. Does that make sense? Right? Like, remember Maya from this show? You can't find her online anywhere. Right? You have to go to dark corners to find the truly violent, dangerous people. And I'm not, I don't get the vibe that Alex Jones is just trying to make enough to buy his next round of booze.
He's just a grifter.
He's. Whoa. But so everybody reports like Alex Jones has turned on Donald Trump. He's not been a Trump fan for a while now. Like, he's kind of been, I just love you, Mr. President, but I just gotta, like, he's not like Wayne Allen Root, who was on his show. Boy, did I get it wrong with that guy. Wayne Allen Root, was just basically saying, like, what, has he been bought out? Has he been sold? And like, listen, I love you, Mr. President. I'm taking my honeymoon at Mar-a-Lago, and I paid extra to have the room so we can share a wall. I'm right next to you. Like, just this hyperactive dick sucking. It was just the most pathetic display I've ever. Oh, it's so funny, But Jones will entertain all these people, and they're killing him in the QAnon world for those statements. But he's right. Like, that was the thing that he did well, and he never mentioned it on the trail because he wanted to appeal to the anti-vax Q crowd. Now he's just sort of mystified by it. Like, he's like, I did a good thing. I thought these people loved me. Why don't they talk about how a good thing I did? So I don't know. All right, we're way off in the weeds. We got to wrap this up. So for the dissent side, So Sotomayor, Breyer, and Kagan, I mean, the long story short with their dissent is, hey, dummies, COVID is real. It's killing people. This is an emergency and a crisis. And it's where most people are contracting it. What do you mean that this isn't OSHA's purview? OSHA's rule So Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan all joined together to write this. OSHA's rule perfectly fits the language of the applicable statutory provision. Once again, that provision commands, not just enables, but commands OSHA to issue an emergency temporary standard whenever it determines that employees are exposed to grave danger from exposure to substances or agents determined to be toxic or physically harmful from new hazards. OSHA must act to prevent workplace harm. Millions of people have been hospitalized. 725,000 have died. So obviously this is a hazard. Nothing in the Act's text supports the majority's limitation on OSHA's regulatory authority. And of course, the majority is correct that OSHA is not a roving public health regulator. It has the power only to protect employees from workplace hazards. But just as explained, that is exactly what the standard does. Consistent with Congress's directives, OSHA has long regulated risks that arise both inside and outside of the workplace. For example, OSHA has issued and applied to nearly all workplaces rules combating fire, faulty electrical installations, and inadequate emergency exits, even though the dangers are prevented by those rules arise not only in workplaces, but in many physical facilities, example, stadiums, hotels, schools. OSHA has regulated to reduce risks from excessive noise and unsafe drinking water. Again, risks hardly confined to the workplace. But there's not a fire. Their argument is, because the argument against that is there's a chance your workplace will have fire, but there's not a fire at every workplace, right? And they're saying, well, it's the chance of there being danger that is why they have the power to do this.
Right.
So they.
I think the question that they're trying to say is, and I don't know if they're not doing it very well, but they're trying to say, like, you have this grouping of people who work in this company, and just like you would not want them to stack certain things a certain way that could fall and hurt some people, you don't want people coming in and bringing in a deadly disease that will infect the whole workforce as well. Right. So that's where they're saying that they're getting the OSHA. OSHA should be able to get involved, is because they are trying to protect the people in the workforce who aren't sick from people who are and are coming in. So they're saying you get the vaccination or you get the test, validate that you don't have this deadly disease, and you can come in and work and everybody's fine. So that's kind of their thinking, and there's a certain logic behind it as far as OSHA and all that stuff is concerned. I think they got the decision right that they don't have the power to do that, but it's just a hop, skip, and a jump from them going to Congress and getting that power.
Yeah.
But it's still, I can see the logic there that they're trying to make. Whether I agree with it or not is a different story.
Yeah. So go ahead, Eric.
And I really think, like, if this was more like, like airborne space Ebola that was melting people's faces off, people would do this.
Yeah.
We talked about this a couple weeks ago in the cursed episode when we were talking about smallpox and the awful steps that they had to go to eradicate it from this earth. If it was something like that along those lines, that's that type of emergency. But we're 3 years after this. Come on.
Yeah, and that's
this government is probably the problem. Yeah, it's not. It that may be something that was valid the first 6 months when it was the initial variant, but now that we're going into Omicron, which is nowhere near as deadly, and
we're entering an endemic phase as opposed to a pandemic phase, where in 2 months, by the time they get
late now,
they're sending everybody a home test and an N95, and by the time you get it, Omicron will be over.
Now it's all about whether they have the power to do it or not, and that's where they're going to be fighting this in the courts, is whether government has this power or they don't have this power.
But this is a great example of everyone looking to government as a leading indicator when it's in reality a lagging indicator. We're almost 3 years into this, and they're arguing about whether or not they have the ability to do it. And you're right, like, that's where markets have the ability. When you have a society that is not centrally planned and governed by markets, and people using decision-making power centralized at the individual as opposed to the president, you have the ability to react quicker. You have the NCAA and the NBA shutting down 2 weeks sooner than local, like the timing to keep the hospitals from being overwhelmed. It's imperative that we do this. We've got to do it. And
Gen Con canceled that.
Gen
right that
Con
same time,
and my employer, like, everybody shut down anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks sooner than the government was able to mobilize its resources to do it because it's political. And so my argument is, a lot of libertarians will make the moral argument of whether or not you should or should not do something, the government should or should not do something. But I also think you should make the utilitarian